There's so many levels to this of nonsense. It's just wading through manure. It's just mental manure. None of this makes any sense.
And we're recording. Welcome to episode 3 of the Unpick podcast, hosted by me, Kay, and my co-host S. Today we have a very special, interesting, and as usual, topical issue to discuss. We will be asking, why are people of color especially mistrustful of the medical profession? And in the current context, why are we especially mistrustful of the COVID vaccine? It's no secret that people of color have been dying at highly disproportionate rates compared to other communities. Recent ONS data showed that if you're a black man, you are up to 4 times more likely to die from COVID, and if you're a black woman, up to 3 times as likely to die of COVID. This is the same for other communities of color. So, for example, the British Pakistani and British Indian community are particularly susceptible as well. So is the Black Caribbean community, who again have similar rates of up to 2 times, up to 3 times the risk of dying from COVID compared to other communities. So, to kick us off today, let's talk for a bit. Why do you think we are dying at much higher rates compared to other communities?
So this is a very big question, and
Mm.
I don't think we'll be able to cover every single thing in this particular episode. So there are different factors at play. So, for example, it could be that we occupy certain sectors
Yeah,
that are more public facing. So, be it, I think, in the Pakistani community, it's taxi drivers, for example. If you are a courier or you work in, like I said, public facing jobs, you're more likely to come into contact with people. Also, if you're lower paid, for example, then you're less likely to be able to afford to not work, and so you're coming into work, or maybe you're working in an environment where PPE or health and safety protocols are not strictly kept. So there's a number of reasons, and essentially what COVID has done is it's amplified pre-existing inequalities anyway.
yeah,
And so COVID has not revealed anything and we've not already known. It's obvious and it makes sense, and I think it's unsurprising that already disadvantaged, disempowered communities are suffering disproportionately. So that's one. I think that's one important reason.
yeah,
And then, of course, we then have the very complicated relationships these communities have with the scientific medical community.
yeah,
You know, we have, and we're going to talk about more about this in some depth. For example, during the last century, even actually, very. I think there's some people alive or descendants of people who their parents, grandparents participated, and participated is such a loaded word because they didn't know what they were doing when they were asked to take part in scientific research. So we've got all this very complicated history, very
yeah,
complicated relationship, and that still echoes today. There are people who still remember this, and so there may be a reluctance to seek help if someone's feeling unwell. They could also be past personal experiences with the medical community, with their doctors and nurses. And by the way, we're not talking about like your grandmother, your mother. We're talking about like young people who have had negative experiences with the NHS, being reluctant to seek help. And also, once again, these communities have very valid reasons to not trust
yeah,
the current government or to trust the British government, to bring it home. And so maybe that's something that's playing with whether this particular commuters are following the rules, because either they don't think the virus is real, and or the virus is real but the government is not properly or accurately reporting how bad it is, or they're not trusting the government's health advice. So there's so many different factors at play, but essentially what they've done is come together to affect what we see, which is disproportionate death and suffering from COVID.
yeah. I think it's important to say that the reasons why you might be mistrustful and anxious can be valid, even
Hmm.
if the information you hold is not true. Like
Yes.
you can mistrust something for valid reasons, but that
Hmm.
I think it's important not to dismiss why people feel anxious about something,
Of course.
because I think that's a first step if you want to challenge misinformation. But just jumping to what you're talking about occupations, I'm looking at a list here from the ONS, a chart. I'm going to read you, from what I can tell, the top 5 sectors or professions that have suffered the most age standardized death rate per 100,000. taxi and cab drivers and chauffeurs, security guards, care workers and home carers, food, drink, and tobacco process operatives, and nursing auxiliaries and assistants. When you think of those five professions,
Also, what a very fancy way to say corner shop when you
yeah,
searching.
because they said shopkeepers and proprietors, wholesale and retail. But when you think about
Exactly.
all the professions I've just read out,
Yes.
come on, who do we think about? I don't need to tell you that, for example, for
Yeah.
taxi and cab drivers, almost 25% are Bangladeshi or Pakistani. We
Yeah.
think that shopkeepers and proprietors, 10% are Bangladeshi or Pakistani, about 10-12% are Indian. Security
Hmm.
guards, there's a whole 15% who are black. So
Yeah.
these are the occupations that are suffering the most from COVID. So it's clear that our community are the ones that are suffering the most. But then there's this other interesting phenomenon when it comes to the vaccine. So we've now had quite a few vaccines except that have been granted permission to be rolled out. And there are
Yeah.
quite some successful vaccine programs across the world.
Hmm.
I was watching American news earlier today, and different polls, but up to 40% of African Americans are saying they will not take the vaccine. And so I think,
Big.
why is it that the community that has suffered the most is also the community that is the least likely to be open and welcoming to the one thing that might possibly save the greatest number of lives at the same
Yeah.
time? So we'll talk about historical context, the kind of pre-COVID, because some of these reasons, as you said, predate COVID. And then later we'll
Yeah.
talk about, are there specific characteristics of the COVID vaccines that also make people of color less likely to take them? So shall we dig deep into, shall we step into the time machine and look into the history?
Just before we get into that, do you remember at school when someone would say, "What if you could go back in time? What age would you go to?" And I've always said forward because I feel like the past is good for Black and brown people for the most part. But yes, let's go back and
No, I got to say something. I used to be a big Doctor Who fan. Do you remember when Doctor Who had the first black, what do you call it, Doctor Who's assistant?
what's the
Companion.
friendly? Yeah,
Companion.
companion.
Because Doctor Who had this thing where they could speak whatever language of whatever
Yeah,
time and race they went to. Did it
yeah.
like deracialize them? Because my girl was turning up to Vikings and medieval England.
Right, and no one was taking her and trying to like touch her skin and hair. Right. Anyway,
Or even the fact she was a woman, they weren't trying to burn her as a witch.
shout out to Doctor Who. That was a great show. David Tennant will always live in my heart forever. But anyway, on to more important things. So, thinking about our history, a lot of people will remember Tuskegee, the Tuskegee syphilis trial, which was supposedly set up to understand syphilis in the Black community. But
Yeah,
what these doctors were doing were they were just giving people syphilis and there was no treatment.
for 40 years.
I mean, how long are these experiments taking? Like, you don't
Yeah,
need these long experiments for syphilis anyway. But what I realized when I was doing research for this, and this is something that I've kind of always been interested in, is something that is related to my line of work, is I found that there was a codified process and protocols for research involving animals before they were protocols for human beings. I don't know if anyone ever read, if one of our listeners read The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. And there was this conversation about anti-vivisectionists, people who are very anti-animal work, right?
yeah,
And there's books and there's poems and there's writings going back talking about animal research. But it's only very recently, comparatively, that we've had the Helsinki Declaration, and it's codified how medical research should when it does involve human participants, what that should look like and what good ethical practices look like. This is the soup that we're swimming in. Now,
yeah,
we go back to even further beyond Tuskegee, we were talking about during the colonial period. Europeans didn't just go to South America, Africa, and Asia just for the natural resources.
yeah,
There were scientists, learned men, as they were referred to, going to the colonies and trying to study diseases and trying to study, flora and fauna, but they're also trying to study people. I mean, we had studies where scientists thought that sort of the circumference of your head correlated to intelligence,
yeah,
and they
yeah,
were great people, and Africans were not human, or sort of on the cusp of animal and human. And so that's the sort of history that we're dealing with. And for those people who are a little bit skeptical, maybe not as understanding, Germany just apologized for the genocide that they perpetrated in Namibia. Some of that work involved unethical practices. You know, There's a really good book which I recommend people to read, and is going to be on my reading list, and it's called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And it talks about the medical experimentation, not just of African Americans, but also of going further back into the colonial period involving Africans.
Mm.
So, unfortunately, we've had this very rich history of medical abuse. That's what it is. Coming closer now, we're talking about in 2021, but at the end of last year, the BMJ, which is a British medical journal, which is a very famous journal for medical research, has had this whole campaign. There's a website which I encourage everyone to go to, has a series of articles, research talking about the racism that is experienced
Yeah.
by Black people at every single level. So we're talking about if you are trying to go into medical school, you're not likely to get into medical school if you're from an ethnic minority. That's one. Then if you do get into medical school, now you're at medical school, there's research to suggest that medical schools don't take discrimination properly. The
Yeah.
curriculum is Eurocentric. It's not diverse. It doesn't address some of the concerns that ethnic minority patients will have, doesn't take into account their histories, all the baggage that we bring to the clinic when we go and seek help. Right. So now you're a medical student, you finally made it to medical school. Now you're trying to get into specialist training. There's an attainment and performance gap between white and
Yeah.
ethnic minority people. And then let's say now you finally made it, you're now a specialist or whatever. Then you encounter higher rates of disciplinary procedures against you. And now that's just medical professionals. Now let's talk about patients.
Yeah.
We know that, for example, Black women, higher rates of maternal mortality. Black men, high rates of certain cancers, certain conditions. And these studies, by the way, do correct for factors such as genetics, age, social status. What that means is when they're looking at two different groups, they're matching them for age. So if they're looking at 50-year-olds, they're looking at 50-year-old men, and they're matching them by social status, occupation, etc., etc. So these studies are just looking at purely race. What is the difference in outcome? What is the difference in diagnosis? All of these things. So now this is a massive baggage that people are now living with.
Yeah.
And then now here comes this vaccine which paradoxically, from someone looking in and maybe doesn't understand the history, they're thinking, well, this is the magic bullet, take it. And actually, if you belong to the community and you know the history,
Yeah.
I empathize. I definitely empathize with someone who is reluctant to take the
Yeah.
vaccine.
Yeah. And I remember seeing, and I'm looking at it now, but I remember when I first saw this, how I was shocked. So this is maternal death rate in the UK. So this is women, how many women die during or after 6 weeks after giving birth. If you're Chinese, that's 5 per 100,000 women. If you're white, that's 8. If you're Asian, that's 15. If you're mixed race, that's 16. If you're Black woman, that's 40.
Jeez,
That is shocking.
that's unacceptable.
The second thing is, until I was doing the research for this episode, I'd listened to a few podcasts about the Tuskegee. I mean, even study feels a bit wrong, right? Or trial,
Yeah,
because
it's
it gives you this veneer of. I realized there were so many things I didn't know.
mm-hmm,
But the point is that didn't matter. Is that I'd heard something about. And this is how culture works and how popular culture works. You don't need to have heard all the details about something for it to shape your worldview. So
You're right.
if you stop a Black person on the street, they might not know the dates, the trials of AIDS research in Africa, sterilization in Namibia. They've just seen
Mm-hmm.
enough memes or enough posts, or they've
Yeah.
heard enough references, and that informs your worldview. And so sometimes I get people saying, but that happened in America, but that was so long
Mm-hmm.
ago. It doesn't matter because this is what you grew up with. There are stories you and
Yeah.
I would have heard growing up that have shaped, for example, the civil rights movement and police brutality. And most of us can't tell you specific dates of marches, of events, of key moments in the struggle. But you grow up surrounded by these stories. And what's more important are the messages you take away from it than the fact, because a lot of culture isn't about dates, times, places, specific facts, processes. It's about stories. And the
Yeah.
stories we've heard and the stories we hear is that when we go into hospitals, our experiences are very different. Like you were saying, for example, that study that showed that healthcare professionals just assume we can take more pain.
or like black skin is thicker. And I think that's one of the reasons why and there's loads of studies that have been done in America, and I think the reason why the BMJ is calling for more research is
Yeah.
because of that. So I think in the UK what they found was that the data is quite sparse and quite unfinished, and for certain groups, especially older black people, there's just non-existent data, right? So looking to America as an example, people think that black people can take more pain because they're like, well, you've
Yeah.
survived slavery, so
Yeah. Yeah.
you have this human strength.
Yeah.
um, that's why, for example, you get pain medication later. So when a black person says my pain is a 10, the doctor's hearing a 4. And if a white person's saying it's a 10, they're immediately, doing everything that needs to be done, which should be done across the board, right?
Yeah.
And just as the thing about someone says, well, it happened in America, so why do you care? Um, Representation matters. Like there is a diaspora community. There is a sense of there is a sense of togetherness. And whether you think it's right or wrong, we all know, like you said, of those past stories, but also more presently, I can tell you so many stories of my friends seeking help, female friends seeking
Yeah.
help and completely dismissed because, well, period pain, that's
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah.
Take paracetamol, right? And so those stories really connect with us. And that's something that humans do naturally. And so all of this culminates in massive vaccine hesitancy in the community,
Yeah.
and it's something that should not be easily dismissed. And I think it's going to take a while to solve. In the more present future, we need to deal with vaccine hesitance in the community. But long term, we need to deal with the fact that there's all these disparities in health outcomes between different communities, and we'll need to address them. But more specifically about COVID, there's also, these WhatsApp groups that everyone has an auntie and uncle who's part of it. They're always hearing something. I mean, at first it was 5G causing cancer. I remember seeing something about the mask having that, the thing that sticks to your nose, the really rigid thing. And I remember seeing a video of this woman. It was an auntie. Unfortunately, she was an auntie. And she was taking it out and she said, this is the 5G receptor or transmitter that, go into your brain and control you. And I think also another question is also, why is it that our community sometimes is more susceptible to these
Yeah.
really, really ridiculous conspiracy theories?
Let's just sum up where we are so far. So even before COVID, we had legitimate reasons to mistrust the medical establishment. There were underlying causes of fear in the medical establishment, not believing what was told to us. And then COVID happened. So we're already starting from a low base. I saw a study by Q Research that showed historically Black African and Black Caribbean groups were less likely to be vaccinated by 50%, or 50% of our community was likely to be vaccinated compared to up to 70% of the wider white community. So let's turn to COVID specific reasons for
Mhm.
skepticism. And it's important to say that the Black community and the wider kind of community of color doesn't exist in a vacuum. There is
Mm.
wider societal skepticism. And a lot of the
Yeah,
reasons that apply to your neighbor, your white neighbor, also apply to us. There'll be some general reasons for distrust in society as a whole, and then there'll be
yeah.
some kind of community specific ones. So, should we maybe start with like the wider ones? Your average Joe's reasons for distrusting the vaccine.
Just to underscore the point that you made, vaccine uptake has been massively decreasing across Europe. I mean, in America as well. And in particular, unfortunately, it's also like the left wing liberal communities. I know in
Yeah,
California, which is supposedly meant to be like a left wing state, like in left wing areas, like vaccine uptake has been massively down because people believe there's mercury in the vaccines, or they believe like, it's going to change your DNA, something that I've heard.
yeah,
One, it speaks to the wider scientific illiteracy in our communities and just the poor education that we have. It speaks to maybe poor communication from the scientific community onto like what they do. And also, a lot of these conspiracies you find are sort of interlinked somehow. So the 5G conspiracy is linked to the vaccine trying to change your DNA, is also linked to the masks not being effective. It's also linked to, just general mistrust of the government. And so essentially it's this quagmire of misinformation. And if you belong to a specific community, that may look slightly different, but it's the same seed. It's the same tree, same fruit of the same tree, which is don't trust the government, because essentially I think it's because people don't necessarily understand a lot of the scientific, research that's been undertaken generally. I think that breeds just natural skepticism that is, it's good to be skeptical, but it's also good to have a process to which your skepticism will be alleviated once you've received the right information. I think people lack that process.
It's such a difficult one because if you think about, let's say, a very basic message, trust your doctor.
Hmm.
You look at the opiate crisis in America. These are doctors who are not acting in the best interest of their patients in prescribing opiates for the most minor illnesses. You look at some of the abuses of the pharmacological industry and big pharma and things like that.
Hmm.
Look where your information's coming. Make sure it's a .gov.uk or a .gov. Whatever country you're in. But then if you're on the left, you're asking me to trust the same government that allows the water to be polluted,
Yeah.
the same government that allows the air to be polluted, that
Hmm.
allows all types of hormones and steroids. Some of these sheep look like they've been lifting weights. And it's that question of how do we. I think the governments have to own some of this.
Yeah.
You have burnt a lot of trust in lots of communities. If you're in America, for example, you've had decades and decades of deregulation. It's
Yeah.
really hard to convince people that a government that's been, or a system that's been hell bent on deregulating everything,
Yeah.
suddenly took the highest stringent
Standard.
measures or the highest standards for the vaccine,
Right.
especially when so much is at stake.
Yeah, right. So I think one, the COVID vaccine is the perfect storm. So
Yeah,
there's money to be made by pharmaceuticals. There are lives on the line. The economy is on the line. So you don't trust your government to make the right decision. And also in the UK, we are, I think, the worst country affected by COVID per capita. I mean, we just passed 100,000 deaths just what last week.
yeah,
I mean, this is the
shocking.
government that told us, eat out to help out. This the government was very reluctant to tell us to wear masks, even though loads of governments across the world were saying masks do help along with social distancing. So
Yeah,
if you're British, I completely understand someone saying this government has taken so many missteps at every single step. I don't know if I can take the vaccine. I don't know if I can do that. And also in the UK, it seems like I found myself asking, where are the scientists? Like, where are they? I want to hear from them. And I'm not talking about Chris Whitty. Is that
yeah.
the
Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer.
right? I want to see him by himself. I don't want to see him next to Matt Hancock, seemingly muzzled. I want him to really give a full-throated response to vaccine hesitance and really explain to people what this vaccine is, how it was made, what it's done. You know, but like you were saying, it's people who there are valid reasons to distrust our government, and I can see why someone would say, you know what, taking everything into consideration, I will sit this one out. Or I've so I ahead of this episode, I polled some of my friends and I said to them, are you going to take the vaccine? And
Yeah,
what are your people? What are your aunties saying? I know what my
yeah,
aunties are
yeah,
saying. What are your
yeah,
aunties saying? And a lot of my friends essentially said either they will take the vaccine. So what was interesting, those who had already taken the vaccine were either already scientifically literate,
yeah.
either or were themselves vulnerable. And for those who had yet to take it, they were saying, well, I'm going to wait and see if what happens when other people take it. And then if it's okay, if no one's head explodes, then I'll take it. Or I'll absolutely take it if I have to. The vaccine passports, there's talk of, if you can't enter a pub, you can't participate in certain public activities unless you've shown that you've taken the vaccine. And I think only then, when absolutely pushed to take the vaccine, then they'll take it. But none of those of my friends were very like ready to take it. The only people who were ready to take it, willing to take it, that's all the people who can download the vaccine paper, read it, understand what it's saying, and make an truly informed decision.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a few conversations with black friends, and we get on the call and we start talking, and then someone mentions the vaccine, and then she looks at me and goes, "You taking the vaccine?" And and I look at her and I go, "Are you taking the vaccine?"
Right,
It's like, okay, on three, let's say
right,
our
rock,
answers out loud, right?
right.
And these are highly educated
Yeah,
professionals who, in some cases, are scientifically literate,
yeah,
but we're kind of at an all-time high distrust, especially in our community. Windrush didn't help.
Not
Grenfell
at
in
all.
help. Who can you trust as an authority figure? And often the people we've turned to or the people who are supposed to look after our interests haven't done that. And so who do then people turn to? I guess that's kind of the next question, right? If you can't trust the people you see on TV, because let's be honest, and obviously we're not speaking for all Black people and all Black African people. In some of our communities, especially the older generation, they trust what's on the TV, right? There's like maybe a historical trust of authority in a way
Yeah.
that maybe our generation doesn't have. But I
Hmm.
think things like Windrush even shook the older generations who traditionally would be like, don't get in trouble, don't
Yeah.
stand out, toe the line,
Yeah.
respect authority. You know, those kind of messages they grew up with about discipline, about
Hmm.
authority, about following the rule. They look at things
Hmm.
like Windrush and go, I don't know if I can trust the authority anymore. One kind of avenue people turn to it, religious and cultural leaders.
Yeah.
You were asking, why is our community so susceptible to some of the most ridiculous conspiracy
It's embarrassing.
theories, right? Now,
Yeah.
some of it is the way that misinformation, a bit like COVID, mutates to be effective. So,
Hmm.
WhatsApp is a killer out here, right? Because I have, I get some of those things forwarded to me. If you've got a religious overlay onto it and you get a message that says the vaccine has gelatin,
Yeah.
the person who sent that knows what they're doing. Muslims will be particularly vulnerable to that misinformation.
Yeah.
Or if you're Jewish, you might be particularly vulnerable to that piece of misinformation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. If it has alcohol, then also the Muslim community are unlikely to take it. If, like you said,
Yeah,
gelatin, if it has if you say aborted babies were used in the
yeah.
making of this, certain communities, evangelical communities, Christian communities will absolutely not take that.
And I think on the WhatsApp thing, obviously everybody has access to the internet, but a lot of the countries our parents and our grandparents came from are
Hmm.
not taking the COVID pandemic seriously, or are
Yeah.
being run by governments who are, as kind of state policy, pushing out the most incredible nonsense you've ever heard. So you and I were texting this week about Tanzania.
Yeah.
By the way, do you say Tanzania or Tanzania?
If you're African, you say Tanzania. No, if Tanzania. If you are not, you say Tanzania. If you were trying to push it up,
Because I say Tanzania.
that's real.
It's a bit like zebra and zebra.
No, there is who. No one says zebra. That is a lie. That is an
Pe-
American lie.
People say zebra, and I remember, anyway, I say, yeah, making me self-conscious how I say my own countries. But the
That's American.
president, the president of Tanzania,
Magufuli. Mm.
ordered that they stop reporting cases and deaths last
Yeah.
year. I think it was like as early as April. So
Yeah.
officially, they've only had 500 COVID deaths. As government policy, they've been recommending steam baths, basically fruit smoothies. And then the Minister for Health appeared on TV, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago.
Was he steaming on? Was he doing the bath on?
She's a doctor, first of all.
Oh, right. Her. Okay.
She's a
Okay.
medical
Yeah.
doctor. She has a master's in public health. She was on TV doing a steam inhalation of local herbs and plants.
It was ginger and lemon. I saw that, and she had this. You sent me the video, and she had a mixer, and she mixed it up, and she had the towel. It's so ridiculous, and she put it over her head, and she was doing the steaming. And I think earlier the president himself had a steam bath in his shorts, bare belly, all out,
Do,
doing that in front of us.
do you know what really got me was and one guy did a steam bath in jeans.
So not penetrating your skin.
If you're Tanzanian in the UK and you've
Yeah.
got family who are back home, that's a
Hmm.
direct. If you've got family in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, lots of African countries, the misinformation is coming straight from some of the sources, especially when these are government sources, straight to your phone. Every
Yeah.
morning I get like, latest news pings on my phone. I also get the latest misinformation pings on my phone. You know,
Wait, who is sending these to you?
I'll tell you afterwards.
Oh, okay. You let me know. They'll be blocked.
We have this kind of historical distrust of the medical establishment,
Mm.
but then we also have these religious and cultural reasons for distrusting the vaccine. But then also, I think there are also practical reasons. So I think access to vaccine is also a big issue because people have to take time off work. Or, I mean, I don't think that will affect lots of people who are over 80s in the first kind of cohorts. But I think as you get closer and closer to younger cohorts, there'll be
Yeah.
socioeconomic barriers. People who have not gone to get a test when they've had symptoms because
Yeah.
A, the testing site is so far, they don't drive or public transport,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Or the financial incentives to stay at home are just not high. We've talked about this before, but
Yeah.
was it like £13 a day to stay at home? I mean, if you're on a minimum wage, that's still 2 hours of work
Yeah. It's not worth it.
to forego 10 days of work for
Yeah.
a fraction of the salary. That's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So, what needs to be done to combat this? I guess the current strategy I've seen across the world is to get high profile people of color to take the vaccine. Okay, let's put a pin in that because I've got another question.
I have thoughts about that,
Yeah,
but
okay, you have thoughts. Share the thoughts because I've got another question.
okay. So, and I think this plays more into the bigger picture question, the issues that we're talking about. For example, a lack of representation. What is the breakdown of, in terms of race, of participants in the trials, right? The
Yeah.
Oxford vaccine was done right here in the UK. I think they had participants in Brazil as well, but there were participants here in the UK. What is the racial breakdown? We don't know that. I think it would be really powerful if they can say, you know what, 20% or 13% or whatever, a proportional part of the participants were from your communities and they survived and they're alive. And also, it would be so powerful to see Black doctors, Black nurses, Black researchers. And unfortunately, we don't have that. But that speaks to long-term, past, historic disparities in who can get into these institutions, who can get into education. So that's one. Also, I don't care if Idris Elba takes it in front of
That
Matt
is
Taibbi.
so mad you said that because I had Idris Elba in my mind. This is an
I
Unagi moment. Why
right,
was I thinking Idris Elba?
I don't care if someone who should have been James Bond but isn't James Bond took. I don't care. I think what would speak to me personally is a Black doctor, a Black nurse saying,
Yeah.
guys, like, I was part of this process. This is my history, this is my background, I'm part of the community. Do I wish in a world people could just follow, because science ideally should be colorblind, but let's not speak to that right now.
Yeah.
The number should not, the number should be clear. And in an ideal world, everyone is scientifically literate, can go download the paper, read it, understand it, make an informed decision. But if we are speaking to people's emotions and we're really trying to address people's concerns in 2021, where is the Black doctor? Where is the Black nurse? Where are these Black professionals? Where are these brown professionals? I think I was listening to, I think The Guardian have a podcast about, skepticism in different communities. I think it's Birmingham, where imams are going in front of their congregations and saying, like, like, I've seen the data, I've been advised appropriately. It doesn't have gelatin, it doesn't have alcohol, it doesn't have all these things. That's really powerful. That's going to increase uptake. Not flipping, I don't know, who's an Asian star? I don't watch TV like that. Mobeen.
Yeah.
I don't know if it speaks to the Asian community if Mobeen goes and gets a vaccine done. I think what's more powerful is their own doctors, their own nurses, speaking to the community, going into the community, and saying COVID is real. Personally, for me, I don't care if Idris does it. I want to see Black professionals. Now, at the earliest opportunity, I'll be getting the vaccine ASAP. I am shooketh to my core. I don't know how my immune system would even respond to COVID if I've not had COVID. So, I will fully take the vaccine given the first opportunity. I encourage everyone to do so. But if I was a skeptical person, I don't care about Idris. Because what that seems to me is very much like, I don't even know the word, but it's almost insulting to the community that, this is a guy that you look up to. There are loads of Black people that we look up to as a community. It's not just, entertainers. It's people look up to real hardcore professionals, doctors, nurses, all of that.
Yeah, I was reading about the Moderna vaccine, and the initial trial had 6% African Americans. The trial was paused to take it up to 10%, which is still not quite I think,
13
to 14%. But I heard Dr. Fauci talking about Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. So she's she's an African American immunologist who's one of the two leaders of the team that created the vaccine. And I think those are exactly the kind of people we want to be pushing to the front. Now, obviously, under Trump, the idea of a Black woman stealing the spotlight would have been unthinkable. But some of these opportunities will start to open. And yeah, I think I'd rather see this doctor in front of audiences than who's the American Idris? Is it Will Smith?
American, oh, that's a good question. Who is the American counterpart to Idris Elba? I think Will Smith kind of fell down with his weird personal life, but I think it's Will Smith, unfortunately. I think it is.
Because what are they like? Perpetual run-ins to be James Bond.
Wait, who suggested Will Smith should be James Bond?
I swear. Well, like their version.
Not a hot take, but actually factual. Will Smith's streak of really bad movies. What was that movie on Netflix?
Oh yeah,
With the
yeah,
fairy?
yeah. I've not liked Will Smith in anything since Men in Black 1.
Oh, that's cold. Even Men in Black 2. Even the yeah. Now Will Smith has gone cold. He's acting.
By the way, what was Will's surname in The Fresh Prince? Was it Banks? No.
I think it was just Will Smith.
Yeah, what's the guy from Fresh Prince doing here?
No, he's Nigerian. What was that movie that he did about concussions in the NFL? And he was like the Nigerian doctor who had
Oh
uncovered
yeah,
it. His
yeah.
accent was so bad.
I mean, you know how I loved Black Panther. I watched it 4
I,
times.
I watched it like 5, 6 times. I love
And
it.
and majority of that was in cinemas, so I paid cold hard cash.
Same. Oh, same.
But the accents there, I was like, if you're
You know,
African,
our people try. Our people try, and our people were trying, and you know what? I appreciated the effort.
there's like a generic Hollywood African accent.
So I thought, how in Game of Thrones, like,
I've never
unfortunately,
watched Game of Thrones.
but the point is,
Yeah,
there's different kingdoms in North, West, South,
right,
whatever, and
right,
they're
right,
meant to refer. For example, the Northern kingdoms have a Northern English accent, like
right,
Manchester, whatever. So
right.
it's meant to mirror.
And
So
right, right.
in Wakanda, you couldn't do that. Like the North, anyway. We're very, very far from the key topic here.
Okay, so this was my other question I was going to ask you was if Black people and other people of color are dying disproportionately due to COVID, should they be at the front of the queue? Now, I
Yeah,
at first thought yes. And then I did a 180 skirt because I was like,
I agree.
I changed my mind for 2 reasons. One's more substantive than the other.
Go with the substantive one first. Go with that.
So, and this speaks to everything we talked about.
Yeah.
We are not dying for biological or genetic reasons.
Mhm.
They are social determinants of health. So
Yeah.
what you need to do is target those social determinants of health. So for example, say we're going to target taxi drivers, because it's not just Black taxi drivers, it's also white
Yeah.
taxi drivers. It's just that we form a large cohort of taxi drivers,
Yeah.
Uber drivers and gig economy. So
Yeah.
understand that we're not dying because of something inherent to us, but it's because of our wider socioeconomic context, and then target those socioeconomic contexts. So I think just simply saying Black people to the front of the line is the wrong approach.
Exactly.
My second thing, though, is
Go on.
so I can hear the conversation already. You mean to tell me
Yeah.
they're testing it on us first?
This is the first thing that I saw, and I said, one, you're playing into the idea that we are natural guinea pigs, like we are the guinea pigs. But speaking of guinea pigs, do you remember early on there was a couple of French doctors who were having this
Yes,
conversation on TV,
wild.
and they said,
Yeah,
let's try in Africa, and there was this massive uproar about that. First of all, you're not helping yourself, but also it's very lazy. Get these people first. And you're
yeah,
right. The research came out that said ethnic minorities in these particular communities are disproportionately affected, and then nothing happened. There was no conversation as to these people
yeah,
happen to be in public facing roles. They're very, they're in the line of danger. How can we better protect them? Let's keep
yeah,
them home. Let's pay them more to stay at home. Let's have a full proper lockdown. There was no conversation about that. And that feeds into, unfortunately, the whole belief that these establishments they were not built for us in mind. And if they were built for us in mind, it was to our detriment. It was never for our benefit and for our upliftment. And so when I saw the idea about let's target, because I've had this has been a debate that I've seen happen about,
yeah.
should we target, should we have targeted cohorts? And I think that would massively backfire. And I think that may lead to even less uptake than
Oh yeah.
before.
Because do you remember? Was it the first 7, 8 doctors to die from COVID in the UK were
Yeah.
Black and Asian?
Yeah. I
And I
remember
think
that.
we have now over 100 right?
Mhm.
Doctors and nurses were just understand that frustration. Why has nothing been done?
Yeah, and I think it's a very easy and lazy thing to say these communities are just illiterate, they're just, they're not intelligent, they're prone to misinformation and the, these myths and stuff. When actually the true response is to deal with these core issues, because there is nothing particular there. Like you said, there's certain um misinformation that targets particular communities, but there is nothing
Yeah,
to say that if our communities are properly informed, our concerns are properly addressed, uptake will not be high. Because my parents, for example, they are they're not scientists necessarily.
yeah,
Well, not necessarily, they're not scientists at all, but but my parents have always been pro science.
yeah,
They would be the first people to take the vaccine. And the reason I should have asked them actually, but I think the reason that why they would be the first people to say absolutely take the vaccine, definitely, ridicule their friends if they came up with these weird theories, is because firsthand they've seen what polio looks like. There's a generation of people who have grown up not knowing what polio is apart from hearing about it. Our parents saw, and their generation saw polio, saw measles,
yeah,
saw children dying, infant mortality being rife. And so those are the memories that they keep in their heads. Because, and I say that to say, not every single Black person is anti-science, but every time I see these conversations happening, it's painting the entire community with this broad brush of, well, they're just illiterate, they're uneducated, when actually we should be targeting those people and essentially empowering people in our communities to have these conversations with their friends, with their family members. Because that's something I've done with my friends. I've reached out to all of them and said, "Are you considering taking the vaccine? Can I help explain it to you? I've read the paper myself. I've taken it to even downloading the paper, highlighting screenshots, sending it to them and saying, like, you know
yeah,
what,
yeah.
they've looked at 50,000 people, whatever the number is. These are the side effects. They're no different to a normal vaccine, etc., etc." And that's the outreach that I wish that the NHS was doing. I wish that Matt Hancock was doing. I wish that our government was doing that, because these concerns are so deep rooted. And this, like you said, the solution isn't to push us all to the front of the line and say, "Well, see, we're helping you, right? You said you were dying, so this is the solution." But
Yeah.
actually to really sit and understand what these issues are, because someone will look around and say, "Well, what does maternal mortality have to do with anything?" It has everything to do with why certain communities don't want to take the vaccine. It's just because of historic mistreatment and abuse, and that should never be downplayed. Because if you truly care about people's lives, you need to take time to understand what the core issues are.
When you said polio, it triggered this thing I wanted to bring up earlier. I'm looking at an article from 2014.
Mhm.
WHO rejects Pakistan CIA fake vaccination claim. But then if you go to the Lancet paper, which is a couple
Mhm.
months from that story, the CIA organized a fake hepatitis vaccination campaign in Pakistan in
Yeah.
a bid to obtain DNA from the children of bin Laden. That had unintended consequences because it
Yeah.
eventually came out, and that led to attacks on polio workers.
Yeah. Getting shot in the streets.
And Pakistan remains one of the few places in the world that still has polio. These things don't help. And here's the thing, you don't need to be across the entire story in the details to have heard of it if you're from the Pakistani community or from other communities. And
Mhm.
by the time these stories are retold and told, retold and told, it goes from CIA to every government agency, and it goes from polio to every vaccine,
Onto fertility, when it wasn't
right?
about fertility in the
You
first place.
only need one bad policy. In this case, we're going to pretend. Couldn't you have done a real hepatitis vaccination campaign and then
I've done
also harvested like? Do you know what I mean? Anyway, at least
that takes serious planning, but they didn't care.
and that led to attacks on workers, healthcare workers, and I'm sure until today there will be deep distrust in those parts of Pakistan.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there is. Pakistan is not polio free.
It'll be interesting to see over the next few weeks, the next few months. I know lots of people have said to me they're going to wait 6 to 9 months to see that heads haven't exploded, as you said, limbs haven't fallen off,
Mhm.
eyes haven't changed color. Um, Once I get that letter, I'll be hopping and skipping to the vaccine center.
Same.
Did you want to do the something on my spirit segment?
Yes. Before we end, maybe this will be the start of a new segment. So we now know the vaccine rollout has, been ramping up in the UK.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of people have been getting vaccinated. Amazing, great. And there's this discussion about who should get the vaccine and who is deserving. I think this week, Gary Glitter, who I think is in prison for child abuse, child pornography, just harming children.
All round evil, terrible person.
Absolutely horrendous human being. And this is not just a UK-wide conversation, because I've seen people in America talk about, Biden wants to vaccinate the immigrants at the border. You were never going to take the vaccine in the first place. Why do you care if an immigrant's going to take it?
So such a good
Right?
point.
Prisoners are going to take it. Prisoners do it. First of all, are you admitting that our prisons are about, they're more punitive than rehabilitative?
Yeah.
First of all.
Yeah.
But secondly, I thought the thing was, you did a crime, you're in prison, that's your punishment, the denial of freedom, right? Now, we know that, for example, our prisons are rife with COVID. I think prisons globally are rife with COVID, because historically, whether you believe in rehabilitation or punitive justice, all of that stuff, rehabilitation, all of that stuff, prisoners are a vulnerable community, and also they're stuck in one place,
Right.
assuming they don't escape.
If you had to pick the conditions for a virus to spread, poor ventilation, cramped quarters, I don't think prisoners are able to wash their hands constantly and do all that good stuff.
Why are we having a debate as to who is moral enough to get the vaccine and who isn't?
Yeah.
Right? Yes, Gary Glitter is a horrible, despicable human being, but is that the conversation we need to be having right now? And also prisoners. I have a friend who I think currently works in the prison service and hopefully will be leaving shortly. What happens if she gets COVID because you didn't want prisoners to be vaccinated? And then she takes it to her vulnerable mother. And then her vulnerable mother, who happens to be Black, now has COVID. And we've just talked about all the issues in our community about seeking help and COVID. And on top of that, the NHS is massively stretched.
Yeah.
God forbid there's this chain of horrible events. If we don't vaccinate this particular population, it's going to lead to hundreds of, if thousands of people being infected and some deaths.
This is the thing I don't get about these arguments. Well, two things. One is we want COVID to end. The less people have COVID, the better it is for you. Second, these people are the people who are the kind of anti-maskers. So you're saying this segment of society shouldn't be vaccinated. None of us should wear masks, or none of us should social distance.
It's the same. If there's a Venn diagram, it's a perfect circle. The people who will not take the vaccine, but somehow have this massive moral issue with prisoners, or people who they think are undeserving, which is usually immigrants and prisoners, vulnerable people, vulnerable for different reasons. Yes, I admit. But somehow you're not going to take a vaccine, but you don't want someone else to get the vaccine. So which is it? But also supposedly you care about lives, right? Because this is also the All Lives Matter group as well. Drives me so crazy because okay, first of all, is COVID real? Because a lot of people are like, well, COVID's a hoax.
You cannot make it make sense.
I've been trying to understand it. Wait.
Also, if the vaccine kills people and you're pro-death penalty, then let's give it to the prisoners, right?
There's so many levels to this of nonsense. It's just wading through manure. It's just mental manure. None of this makes any sense. When I hear these people, I just hear, I'm a terrible person. I'm a terrible human being. But you're just openly admitting to that.
Yeah.
I mean, like the Sun and the Gary Glitter. There's people in there for minor offenses because we happen to live in a very punitive system, right?
Yeah.
So there are people in there who, let's say someone's in there for 3 months. Should they be coming out and then infecting their families? And then you're the same person when this person then has long COVID, can't get a job. Look, you're a bum.
Yeah, you shouldn't get welfare benefits. Did you see that it's a 10-year sentence? We'll talk about this because 10 years is crazy.
It's so crazy.
There are murderers, well, maybe not murderers, but they're like violent people who get less than 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years for going to Ibiza is a bit mad. But
it's its own punishment to go to Ibiza, but I won't even go into that. The damage you're doing to your liver and your eardrums is just, honestly. But
you know what? Maybe this is me just getting older, more mature, more wiser. There is nothing great about liver poisoning. That corrosive feeling you wake up the next morning.
Good old days.
All right. So, do you have anything else you wanted to?
No, I think that was it. That's literally something that was just on my spirit, and I just had to get it out.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Unpicking podcast. We've been releasing episode every 2 weeks, so we'll try to keep that pace. Yes, we need to get into the habit of doing the socials. So it's at the Unpick underscore podcast.
You always stammer, and I get it. I understand because I don't think I know it myself. I mean, let me just go on it right now because I do not know. When I tell you, I really struggle with this whole thing. So it's at Unpick underscore podcast.
Oh
That's the
yeah, I
Twitter.
got it right.
Yes, you
Yes.
did. Instagram is the same. The Gmail, I think, is also a good place. Any questions, thoughts, whatever, anything. I think it's unpickpodcast@gmail.com. Spotify on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, anywhere, everywhere. I think we're pretty much everywhere.
All right. So send us, tweet at us, send us questions, send us stuff, and we will. It's early days, so we will definitely respond to every single.
Exactly. Listen, I'll be on it. I have alerts. I'll get back to you. Best customer
notification
service.
notification bells and all the stuff I hear from YouTubers. We've got all that switched on. So get in touch.
Also, I take the time to upload on YouTube, and I mean, who even is on YouTube? But
Yeah.
anyway.
So, well, thanks again for joining us on this episode on vaccine skepticism and hesitancy in the Black and wider communities of color. And we will see you again in 2 weeks.
All right. Have a great 2 weeks.